Hello and welcome to episode 44 of the ReptiChat podcast, the only place on the internet where you can listen to people talk about all sorts of exotic animals every other Saturday live at 7:30 p.m. Just a quick reminder that this is a pre-recorded episode, so we won't be responding to any comments in the live chat on YouTube. But as always, thank you for coming along. Right, quick bit of housekeeping before we get into today's episode. First thing is first, Patreon. Patreon, you guys are on screen now. Thank you to each and every single one of you, guys and girls. You make making this podcast that little bit easier. Not a Patreon member? Here's a few reasons why you might like to join. 1, there's stickers. Who doesn't love a sticker? 2, there's the Repti Squad Discord, where we're slowly building a nice little community of like-minded reptile keepers. Number 3, you get your name on the Patreon slides. Ooh. Number 4, early access to all of the Repti vlogs and early access to any pre-recorded podcast episodes, much like this one. And finally, number 5, it starts at as little as £1 a month, and there's even a 7-day free trial. So yeah, there is 5 reasons why you should consider joining the Patreon. The link is in the show notes below. Also, just a quickie, I have mentioned it a few times now, but I am a Tough Mudder ambassador. So what does that mean for you guys? Well, if you fancy having a go at getting covered head to toe in mud, almost clambering over obstacles, potentially getting electrocuted like I am on screen now, and making some friends along the way, then use the code at the bottom of the screen, save yourself some pennies, and come along. Audio listeners, the code will be in the show notes as well. So that's that out of the way. So today's guest. I seem to be on a bit of a roll with international guests at the moment, and this today is no different. I'm sure you've either seen him on YouTube or Instagram with what is, frankly, an absolutely amazing project that I'm sure most of us would only dream of having. So, without any further ado, let's get the intro done, and then we'll have a warm welcome for Zach from A Life Exotics. Hello, hello.
Hey, how's it going?
It is not going bad at all, mate. Thank you very much for coming on. I'm really, really excited for this episode. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, good. Been busy, been landscaping, doing a little bit of work, but I'm excited to be on here. So thank you for
Yeah,
having me.
you're very welcome. I see you've been building a deck at home as well, so lots going on.
Yeah, we've been building a deck. We just finished that, and now we're like re-landscaping my parents' whole backyard. So been a
Nice.
super fun day so far. So sorry if I'm sweaty and gross. You probably can't see it on camera, but
No, it's absolutely fine, mate. Don't worry. Don't worry. So I like to start each episode with 10 quick fire, like this or that questions. It helps us all get to know you a little bit better and it sort of breaks the ice a little bit. So if you're happy, we'll get started with the questions.
yeah, let's do it.
Fantastic. So, first up, most important one, cats or dogs?
Dogs, definitely a dog person. I do like cats though too, but dogs for sure.
Fantastic. Snakes or lizards?
Ooh, that's tough. Probably snakes if I had to choose, but I'm like, I go back and forth.
Yeah. Frogs or salamanders?
Frogs,
Centipedes or millipedes?
millipedes,
Spiders or scorpions?
spiders,
Nice. Birds or butterflies?
birds,
Grassland or woodland?
woodland,
Nice. Beach or mountains?
mountains,
Hot climate or cold climate?
hot.
Nice. And the most important question, actually, of the entire podcast is what is your favorite biscuit or cookie?
Oh yeah, I like how you had to throw the American word.
Yeah.
uh, I don't know. That's tough. I don't know what. For us, I think it's a little bit different. I just like normal chocolate chip cookies, you know.
Yeah. No, I like a chocolate chip cookie. That works a treat. Fantastic. Right. That's those out of the way. So, Zach, could you please give us all a history lesson into your sort of reptile exotic keeping career? And obviously, hopefully there's a few fish fanatics listening as well. So go as detailed as you want in the fish as well as the reptiles for us.
Okay, so pretty much I just been obsessed with animals and stuff my whole life, but keeping really started in my early teens, probably somewhere around 12 or 13 years old. I think I got a little 10-gallon aquarium from Walmart, and I think I put like some little fiddler crabs in it who quickly died. They did not last very long in there. So I Googled it, tried to figure out why, and then that's like what started it all. I was like, oh, there's forums and stuff online and a whole plethora of information on there, and you can actually learn how to properly care for stuff. So I got really into aquariums. I was into aquariums for a long time, and then I got really into reptiles probably around 16 years old, I think.
Yeah.
So, and I did freshwater aquariums, and then I evolved into saltwater aquariums, and then back to freshwater, and then into reptiles. When I first got into reptiles, I was mostly into snakes. I will admit, get hit by the ball python craze a little bit. I
We've
think when
all
I was
been
like
there.
17 or so, I had like 35 different ball pythons and all kinds of stuff. But I've always been kind of a generalist. I like keeping a lot of different stuff. I don't really like specialize in one thing.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I went back and forth with reptiles and aquariums for a long time. Kind of got out of it due to some life stuff in my early 20s. Didn't really keep anything for quite a while. And then when I got back into it, I got back into reptiles and shortly after aquariums again. And I just can't stay away. I have to have both.
Yeah, no, it's fair enough. I've had a few aquariums sort of in my younger days, but I would probably say I know nothing about fish. It's just the easiest way to go about it. But I know a lot of the listeners, like yourself, have reptiles and are also very passionate about fish as well. So I'll do my best to sort of dip in the fish section as well as the reptile section. But
Sounds
yeah,
good.
uh, so a relatively um sort of standard upbringing with regards to reptiles. Most of us are similar, like probably a bit of Steve Irwin or something. Got one in our early
Yep.
teens, and then most of us sort of dipped out when we get late teens, and then back into it with event like with I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but later on in life. Um,
Yeah. Once you get established in life and you realize, oh man, I could
I've
start
got
messing around with this a
I've
little
got
bit
I've
more. I
got
have some
adult money.
space. Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Um. So obviously the main reason I got you on is because of the project you're undergoing at the moment. So I don't know if it has a specific name or not, so I'm just calling it A Life Exotic because that's your like name as a whole.
Yeah.
So can you tell the people what the project is? What are you doing?
So basically, I'll start just by saying when I was in my teens and I got really into reptiles, I got really into that was when like bioactive vivariums very first became a thing before it was even like really popularized.
Yeah,
But it was like in the early stages of that, I guess. So just building vivariums in general was starting to really become a thing outside of the dart frog hobby. Dart frog people have been doing it forever, it seems.
yeah,
But, yeah, so I got into that and building custom vivariums, and I just really always had the idea. I think I got it when I was probably 16 or 17, but I was just like, thought it would be so cool. One day when I'm grown up, I'm gonna build a whole bedroom and waterproof it and make a walk-in vivarium, you know? That was always my dream. And then slowly over the years, it's evolved and now spiraled out of control to what it is now, which is a 20 by 30-foot tropical jungle greenhouse. So it's basically a huge walk-in greenhouse, and I've just treated the whole thing like a giant communal vivarium. So
yeah,
we've got like the 2,000-gallon tropical fish pond in there with a bunch of cool South American fish like peacock bass and a black diamond stingray and some arowana. And then I've got all kinds of plants. Everything is just planted in the ground, not potted. We're like trying to replicate a neotropical rainforest. So,
yeah.
and all the species, by the way, are tropical species that come from the neotropics and from rainforests. But yeah, so we just got a bunch of animals running loose in there, fish, all kinds of cool stuff, and then lots of really, really cool plants. So,
Yeah, yeah, it is absolutely amazing. Every time you post an update, I am just like they're gobsmacked in awe. Like, damn, this is incredible. Um,
thank you.
so how did you come up with the plan for this, really? Because let's face it, nobody that I'm aware of has done it on this sort of scale. The only thing I can compare it to, obviously, it's much larger here, is the Eden project, which is basically what you're doing now, but huge.
Yeah.
But I don't know anyone. There's a few people that keep a certain species outside, but what you're doing is pretty much, I think I would say you're the only person doing that in the world that I'm aware of.
Yeah. The only one that I'm aware of, too. I'm sure there's probably somebody out there, but I would love to find them and meet them. But yeah, the truth is I'm just an obsessive researcher, I guess. When I get into something, I like really obsess over things. So I always had the idea, like I said, of the greenhouse. And then I had one year, it was a whole thing, but I was working out of town. So I was only home on the weekends. and I was just kind of sick of life being mundane, and I was just getting to the point where I was like, I'm ready to just do something cool, you know? I'm sick of it.
Yeah.
I'm sick of asking for permission for life to be cool. I'm gonna just do something and make it cool. And I think I came across some videos that were like a geothermal heated greenhouse. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's my vivarium idea right there. Cause I always wanted to do it. And I always thought a huge detached building or greenhouse would be amazing. But I just thought it was impossible. Cause for those that don't know, I'm in northern Utah. It gets like pretty cold here. So we get winters. I'm trying to think what it would be in Celsius, but in
Uh,
Fahrenheit, we
I can
get like
Google it.
winters can get down to like pretty consistently in the teens, like 15 degrees, you know. So it'll be 20 degrees during the day. Nights can get quite a bit colder. And then we have really hot, dry summers. Like my
So that's like
humidity,
-9, -10 Celsius. That's really cold.
yeah. So we get like snow, like full blown winter time here. And then in the summer, it can get up to like, I think 100 or so degrees. It can get up to like 110, but usually in the 90s to 100. So I think that's like,
Yeah,
what,
so it's
30,
like
35 degrees.
35 to 38 degrees Celsius. So again, hot. So
Yeah. So
a
cold
huge
winters,
extreme.
yeah, cold winters, hot summers, and it's super dry. I'm like basically in a desert. Like a lot of times it's 10-15% humidity here, like insanely low humidity. So that obviously made it seem impossible to build a tropical jungle greenhouse, or it made it seem just like it would be impossible to afford, you know, like to heat
Yeah,
something like that. So I started kind of researching the geothermal greenhouse stuff and passive greenhouse technology and different stuff like that. And I started to realize like this might actually be possible. So then I just ran with it. I think for probably a couple months, I probably barely slept at all. I stayed up till 3 or 4 in the morning, like every single night. I was working at like 6 a.m. and I would stay up till like 3, just researching stuff.
yeah,
And then I just said, screw it, we're going to do it. And we just started step one, which is dig the hole and install the geothermal system. And then pretty much just been doing it step by step. I try to stay about 2 or 3 months ahead of myself on like
right, okay.
as far as knowing having projects planned out. That way, like by the time I finish a project, I know the next couple things that we're doing. But
Yeah,
yeah, it's just honestly just obsessive research. I think the skill of researching is something that is overlooked by a lot of people. If you like learn how to research stuff properly, you can literally do anything you want nowadays. The internet's amazing. So
yeah. I think on something of the scale that you're doing as well, you like a vivarium is very easy to heat. We all know how to do it now. Something on the scale that you're doing, that's mad. So how does in like simple terms, how does your geothermal system work? And what was the process of, you said digging the hole, how deep are we digging it? What sort of,
yeah, so pretty much the deeper the better. But the concept is you're using the earth as like a heat sink, basically. So what I did is I dug 8 feet down and then I put in these layers of tubing. Like I used, it's called ADS drain tubes, but basically I'm just pumping air through it. So it's just like
right,
corrugated tubes with little slits in it so it doesn't fill up with water, so the water can drain out. So 8 feet down, I think it's like 7.5 feet. I started hitting groundwater, so that's cut it a little bit short.
yeah,
But we put one layer of tubing and then we compacted 2 feet of dirt all the way around that. So it's, I'm trying to explain it. I guess it's like on the ends of the greenhouse, the short ends, there's a 6 inch tube, you know,
yeah.
and then in between each tube is 4 inch tubes going, and they're all spaced
Okay,
out 2 feet. So it's just like this grid work basically of pipes. So then there's two layers of it, 2 feet apart. And then what that does is at the very top of the greenhouse, because you got to think the heat rises, so all the heat goes up. So it pumps that very hot air from the top of the greenhouse down through all that. And during the day, what that does is it cools down the air quite a bit because the ground temperature is always going to be more stable than everything else.
yeah,
So it cools the air down quite a bit. So it actually helps. I honestly, now looking back on it, I think it helps with cooling during the summer more than it helps with heating in the winter, actually. But
okay,
it cools the air, which in turn heats up the ground a little bit. And then during the nighttime, when all the cold air is at the top because it has the most wind exposure, it pumps that cold air through the ground that you've been heating up all day and also has just a more stable temperature and pumps out warmer air. So pretty much all it costs is just running those two fans at the top of the greenhouse. And it basically helps you cool when it's really hot outside and heat when it's really cold outside. But
wow,
it's
okay,
definitely not like the main source of heating. It's just my thought was that I want to do everything to make it as efficient as possible because I know the main source of heating is going to be expensive. So
yeah,
I was thinking spend money up front and then not spend as much money monthly long term, you know?
yeah. No, it makes perfect sense. So along with that, what are your other, well, what are your main sources of heating?
So the main source of heating is just a natural gas shop heater.
Right. Okay.
Just a big natural gas heater.
And do you find that you need that? I suppose in the summer it's not too bad, but in the winter, is that like going at full capacity all the time as well as the pipe work, or does it sort of balance itself out so it is quite efficient?
No, so the geothermal just runs all the time, and then the heater is just hooked on a thermostat, and it
Okay.
runs it I mean, when it's cold outside, it probably runs like, it'll be snowing outside, and I think the heater will turn on for, like, 3 or 4 minutes every 15 to 20 minutes, you know?
Oh, right. Okay. So
Which
it
is quite a
yeah,
bit, but
but at the
it's
same time, it's not a lot really. Like
yeah.
that's really good. So I've got like a list of questions in front of me. It's not a script, but I will keep referring back to it. But when I was writing them out, I didn't write them in any particular order, so we might seem like we're jumping to and from, but it will all make sense in the end, hopefully, and hopefully the guys listening will enjoy it. But one of the things you've said couple of times is the greenhouse. So what I envision a greenhouse is in the UK, I don't know if it's different anywhere else, is generally a wooden frame with glass panels everywhere, whereas
Mhm.
yours is more of what I would describe as a polytunnel. Is that correct?
Yeah, okay, so polytunnel is a good so, yeah, I'm kind of a like, the design of the greenhouse
Yeah,
is I built it all custom because I couldn't find any, like, design that fit my needs, but, yeah, it's closer to, like, a polytunnel.
yeah.
So,
So
we would call those, like, polytunnels or hoop houses, where it's just,
yeah,
like, the rounded top with the poly on it. But,
yeah,
yeah, so I built that with the I forgot what it's called, I think, like, the cathedral shape to it, you know? So it's, like,
yeah,
typical house shape.
yeah. It is absolutely incredible. In fact, I'm going to pause here and just say, go and check out Zach's Instagram or YouTube. The links are in the show notes already, and I'll mention it again at the end of the show. But it's some like honestly, if somebody explained it to me, I wouldn't believe how incredibly cool it is, and it just keeps getting better and better. Anyway, back to the
Yeah, thank
conversation.
you.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. It is really cool. Like you recently had like the stream added through the middle of it.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's absolutely amazing. I'm looking at it like this is like I want this in my garden. It's so
Y
cool.
yeah, I'm so happy with how the stream turned out. It, like just as far as aesthetics go, it, like, doubled how cool the greenhouse was overnight. It made such a big difference.
Yeah, definitely. So jumping back in time a little bit, what when you were building it originally, were there any particular difficulties you faced when sort of doing the geothermal and building the actual tunnel itself, or was the assembly of like the bare shell relatively straightforward?
Um, there were, like, little problems with every project, you know? So, like, just like you do anything and you realize, "Oh, this is actually more complicated than I think," but, uh, cost, I will say, everything ended up being it always does, but it ended up being way more expensive than I thought. So, like, as I was going, it just kept getting more and more expensive. And then, like, the framing was kind of difficult just because I'm not a super experienced framer. So, like, pretty much so I dug the pit, I did the geothermal, and then I poured a foundation around the edge, and then I built the sides up because the whole ground level is still, even after doing the geothermal, like 3 feet underground pretty much.
Right.
So then I built the sides up with cinder blocks. So it's all block walls up to about 2 or 3 feet above ground level. And then on top of that, I wood framed the front and the back, so the north and south facing sides. And then the ribs basically that just go through the rest of it that hold up the plastic are like electrical conduit that I
Okay.
connected and bent to get their own shape. So that was easy, but the wood framing, the north and south side was kind of difficult just because I tried to like it's hard to research things like this because nobody's done this exact thing. So I'm trying to
Yeah.
like research other things that are similar and apply it to it, which is pretty difficult sometimes. There's not like a guide anywhere for that. So trying to
Yeah.
make sure that it'll structurally hold the whole thing up and be safe in wind and stuff like that kind of stressed me out and made it hard. So I kind of overdid it, but it ended up working out good. So, and
Yeah.
then yeah, throughout the whole process, there's been like little issues here or there, but no like major roadblocks that have shut things down by any means.
No, that's good. That's good. Like you expect, especially with a project that, like you say, no one's done before, you expect to have some teething issues.
Yeah, I honestly expected there to be more issues, like a lot more than there is. I'm like,
Yeah.
so far, I've been super pleased every step of the way. But like I said, we put a lot of thought into it before doing stuff, and we tried to like really, really think of like every single thing that could possibly go wrong and plan for that,
Yeah.
which easier said than done. But it's gone better than I expected. So we have had very little issues so far.
No, that's perfect. So one of the main things that I worry about, even in vivariums, is animals escaping. You've got quite a few, so quite the selection of animals living in there now, and
Yeah.
we'll get on to what animals you've got in there in a minute. But how escape-proof is it? Have you had any escapees, or have you had to add any additional measures since building the thing because of potential escapees?
No, so it is. I'm pretty confident it is 100% escape proof, and it seems impossible, but it's really like I don't know. I need to get like a whiteboard behind me here so I can like draw stuff next time I
Yeah,
do
it's
a
difficult.
podcast. But it's so since the whole thing is the plastic, right? And it's airtight plastic because so I guess I'll just mention this real quick. Sorry if I
Yeah.
like ramble and kind of go all
No,
over the
it's
place.
absolutely
It's
fine.
hard to it's a complicated thing, so it's hard to
Yeah.
explain things. But the whole greenhouse has two layers of polyplastic and then they're inflated in between the two layers. So that
Okay.
also helps insulate it really well.
Like a double
So that's
glazing
what
window, but made from plastic.
Yep, but it's like a giant bubble. So like in the middle of the greenhouse, there's like almost 2 feet of air in between the two layers of plastic. So that's why I did the plastic way because it insulates way better than glass. It
Yeah.
insulates way better than even double or triple pane glass, which would have cost me like a ridiculous amount of money anyways. But so that's another reason I keep or another way I keep it heated. But so with that being said, basically the front of the greenhouse and the back of the greenhouse are each their own section of plastic that is inflated. And then the whole rest is basically one big U shape that goes over the whole thing.
Yeah.
So, and then all of that sits on top of the cinder block frame. So really it's all airtight. The only spot that can leak is any like ventilation or doors I have, which are
Yeah.
only a few spots, and then where the framing meets the cinder block. So it seems complicated to keep things from getting out, but really there's only a few escape points. So around where the framing meets the cinder block, I've just done a really good job of like foaming it and using different weather stripping and stuff. So
Yeah.
it's like 100% tight. And then same thing around the door. I just do multiple layers of like custom weather stripping screwed in around it. So there's no way things can get out. And then with the vents, I basically have two vents at the back, two 30-inch vents, and then a big fan in the front. And those are the only vents to the outside of the greenhouse. And those I put screen all the way around. So basically
Yeah.
I screened all the way around it, and then I like sandwiched metal bars on it and screwed that in. So it's completely sandwiched to the wood. So there's like no possible way. So that is one question I get a lot: is how do I keep things from escaping, or how am I? I always get people saying I'm going to cause invasive species, and I'm like, I'm in Utah. It's not it's not going to
Yeah.
happen. But either way, I do put a lot of thought into that, and I don't want my valuable animals escaping and dying. So I
Yeah, no,
love all
definitely.
my
Because
critters, but
all
yeah,
the
it's
animals that you have got, they're all relatively small as well. So it was like,
you
I like, for example, I keep mourning geckos, and they're in an exoterra enclosure, and I'm concerned that they're going to get out of that. So I can't imagine them in something like the size of my house that I've built myself. I'm sure they'd find a gap because I reckon I could probably escape. So
yeah.
that's really impressive.
So if you imagine the greenhouse wouldn't be too much different than an exoteric, just on a massive scale. So
Yeah,
basically, like your escape points would be the lid on the top. So
yeah,
imagine you took spray foam and filled every single gap around that. And then around the door, imagine you took super thick foam and brush weather stripping and put it around all the doors.
yeah.
It's like would be impossible to get out of.
Oh, okay. No, that's good. Was that something you thought of when you first started the build, or was that something when? I don't know. But I'm going to just jump back and forth. When you were doing the build, had you always planned to have like the lizards and stuff in there, or was it more like for the fish and the exotic plants?
Yeah, I always planned on having reptiles in there.
Right. So it was always escape proof from day one was the plan.
Yep,
Yeah. No.
100%.
Perfect. So obviously we've mentioned it a few times, but what animals have you got living in there besides the fish? Because we'll touch on the fish in a little bit.
Okay, so as far as reptiles and amphibians, I'll start with the amphibians. I got the star of the show, the little Phyllobates terribilis. I got some Blackfoot orange dart frogs in there. I have a group of 6 of them. And then I have a group of 6 blue-webbed gliding frogs, Rhacophorus ranwartii. And then I have 2 red-eye tree frogs. So those are the amphibians I have currently. And then for the herps, I have 3 emerald tree skinks, a group of 6 Tachydromus smaragdinus, and then 2 blue day geckos, the Lygodactylus williamsi.
Yeah. No, brilliant. And that, obviously they're really small as well. And for the size of the enclosure, it must be like going herping each time you go in there because obviously it's not like looking in a viv and going, oh, it's a 4 foot box. There it is. You go, right, where is everything?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's actually fun. It's, like, super fun looking around. But that is one thing I will say that I've learned is, uh, I see the animals more than you would expect in such a large space. So, I've always kinda had this suspicion that giving animals more space doesn't typically make them hide more. I learned
Yeah,
that with, dart frogs, like, I kept Aratus for a while, and they always hid, and then as soon as plants grow in and everything's super densely vegetated, then I see them all the time. So it's
yeah,
like the more basically, if an animal can always be within 2 or 3 inches of cover that it could easily dart under, it's more prone to sit out in the open. Where
yeah.
if it doesn't have a bunch of cover, then it doesn't, you know? So, like, the greenhouse is massive, it's 20 by 30 foot compared to a vivarium, and I still only have 6 of the dart frogs, and
Yeah.
I see 4 or 5 of them every single day, at least. Like, they're always out. The emerald tree skinks are pretty shy. So far, the tachydramas are pretty bold. They're
Yeah.
so small and skinny that they're hard to find, but when you do find them, they're not scared of you at all. They'll let you get right in their face. So usually, like on an average day, if I just go over there after work, I can see at least 3 or 4 of the dart frogs, the tachydramas, and I can usually find the 2 blue day geckos too, surprisingly.
That's cool.
I only have a pair in there, 1 pair,
Yeah.
and I can almost always find at least 1 of the 2 of them.
Do you find they all tend to stick to the same spots, or do they use the full greenhouse?
Um, It depends, like, some animals so the dart frogs, everything definitely uses the full greenhouse, but they'll kind of find their little territory, and then it
Yeah.
might change every few weeks. Like, the emerald tree skinks for sure, they're the most shy out of everything, surprisingly, because 'cause they're known for being these super bold, handleable lizards, but
Yeah.
the second you walk in there, they dart into somewhere.
Yeah.
But, so they definitely have their spot where they pretty much I know they're almost always there 90% of the time. The blue day geckos have only been in there for about a month, and they had one little spot up on this electric conduit where they were at every single time I went in there, and now they're, like, starting to explore. I've noticed I keep seeing them in different spots now. And
Okay.
then the dart frogs, they'll split up all across the greenhouse, then they'll all kind of find, like, their prime territory where they're usually at, but they change quite a bit too. So, they'll each have a territory for a week or 2, and then the next
Yeah.
week or 2, they'll be in a different spot? So they're kinda just all over the place. And the tachydramus, so far, the only consistent spot I find them is in that big tree in the middle.
Yeah.
So they must like something about that tree, but I can almost always find a male and a female in that tree.
That's so cool. That's so cool. And how do you find the animals get on with each other? Is there much interaction between the animals, or do they tend to keep themselves to themselves?
So far, they just all kinda keep to themselves. Except for the dart frogs. The dart frogs they'll be hanging out in groups and stuff a lot. Sometimes I'll come and they'll all be completely spread out, and
Yeah.
then sometimes there'll be 4 or 5 of them in one little group together hanging out. I think now that they're getting closer to sexual maturity, they're starting to hang out together more and more. It's like when I first put them in there, they spread out, and now they're, like, slowly starting to hang out in groups more often. But between species, I have seen, like, no interactions hardly at all.
Yeah.
When I first introduced the emerald tree skinks, I was pretty nervous that they were gonna eat one of the dart frogs. It was a I figured it was a very low chance of it happening, but that was my biggest concern, and literally one of the lizards, right when I dropped it, it ran my biggest, dart frog that I have, we call him Frogbert. He's, like, the biggest, boldest out of all of them. He's always just in everybody's face, like, he'll hop right up to you and just start calling.
Yeah.
But, the emerald tree skink ran right over to where he was at, and I was like, "No, no, 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 no," and he jumped out and literally, like, I'm talking, like, a millimeter from its face, literally just jumped out and looked at it, and it turned and ran away, and I was like,
Oh,
"Okay,
yeah.
I guess that's not gonna be a problem at all." Yeah, so far, I think I have such low populations of each species right now that I'm not really seeing much interaction between species, so I
Yeah.
think that's definitely something I'll have to keep an eye on as I start to get more and more, and once things start to breed and produce offspring and I start to get larger numbers of them, 'em, I'll definitely probably start to see more interactions, and I'll have to kinda gauge things out from there.
Yeah, it's definitely a learning curve, but I suppose as time goes on and, like you say, things start breeding, the plants will also be growing, so then there'll be more places for them to hide. Because like, your plants are growing at a ridiculous rate at the moment, but
Yeah,
it should all grow in more, and then although there'll be more animals, there 4 times as many, 10 times as many leaves to hide under or whatever, so it probably all work quite symbiotically.
yep. So that's my thing, I'm big on visual barriers?
Yeah,
So that's why I kind of built the ecosystem from the bottom up, and then as things grow in, I realize, okay, there's more habitat here. There's a lot more hiding spots here. time I can add something else, you know? So I don't just add a bunch of stuff at once, but yeah, I think eventually once I'm finished hardscaping too, because I plan on adding a bunch more big like branches and basically making a full jungle canopy in there. Like that's
Yeah.
what I tell people right now. I pretty much have the forest floor complete, but I haven't even started on the canopy.
Yeah.
So once that's all in there, there's going to be so many visual barriers that I think I could have like not that I'm going to, but I think I could have hundreds of animals in there and they would have plenty of places to hide. In a
Yeah.
vivarium, if things have a problem with each other, they're kind of stuck, you know? Even in
Yeah.
a 3 or 4 foot vivarium, we think of that as like massive, right? But like in the wild, that's still the one animal's territory. So
Yeah.
that's
Definitely.
like really not escaping from each other, you know? But in the greenhouse, if something has a problem with another animal, it can literally just go to the other side. It's just
Yeah.
making sure there's a lot of little happy habitats. So if it does have to go somewhere else, there's somewhere that suits its needs properly.
Yeah, I think with the size as well, there's like obviously if you had a few animals cohabitating in a vivarium, say it was 4 foot, they're going to bump into each other a few times a day. Whereas your animals will probably be lucky if they bump into each other a few times, maybe every other week.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
there's less stress on all of them as well. So in theory, they should all be good. But it's exciting, and obviously, like you said, it's something nobody has ever done before. So you've got to do it one like and find out what happens one way or another.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with so not so many, but with this variety of animals you've got in there, what and how are you feeding them? Because I presume it's not as simple as like going in and dumping a tub of crickets in there.
Yeah, so, it is that simple, actually.
Oh,
So
okay.
there's, like, tons of, uh, just insects in there breeding. Like, I have
Yeah.
a bunch of native insects in there breeding. I don't even know what they are. I have, like
Yeah.
I swear I have, like, 5 plus different species of little fruit flies in there, and then, if I pick up a handful of the mulch off the ground and just look through it, it is covered in little tiny insects and stuff, and then I've introduced a lot of feeder insects too that I'm hoping will breed and sustain their own population eventually. A lot of them
Okay.
already are, but like I've introduced banded crickets, banana roaches, black soldier flies, mealworms, a bunch of different isopods, a bunch of different springtails, stuff like that. And the
Yeah.
only thing that I don't think is really breeding and doing too good is the crickets. I think they do breed in there because
Yeah.
I've gone like 2 months without introducing any, and I'll still see babies. I just don't think they're breeding at a rate that's sustainable. So I think I'll always
Right.
have to add some. But yeah, basically once a month or sometimes even every other month, I just buy like 1,000 crickets, some pinhead crickets, and then I try to diversify the feeders. So I'm still
Yeah.
trying to add a bunch of different species of roaches and different stuff like that. But for like I'm feeding the whole greenhouse as much or less than I fed when I had like 6 vivariums at home.
Right.
There's
Okay.
just like so many insects in there that all the animals eat no problem. So honestly, one thing, like, especially with the tree frogs, when I first put them in the greenhouse, I was really worried about them being able to hunt and find their own food, and they all get for the first month or 2 that they're in the greenhouse, they all get way fat. Like, I
Oh,
actually got concerned for a while that, like, all my animals were getting obese. Like, my gliding frogs, the female is huge. She looks like a Pac-Man frog. She's, like, round, and they're not like
wow.
that in the wild. They're pretty, like, slender frogs, you know?
Yeah.
So if any I don't know. I have yet to see an animal that is not a little bit pudgy in the greenhouse. So,
Well, that's good. That means they're finding the food at least.
yep.
Yeah. No, that's mad. Um. Yeah, that's really cool. And do you think that um I presume the native insects, they're not going to be a problem, and they're all safe for the animals to eat as well. It should be absolutely fine, I presume.
Yep, I think
Yeah.
so. Because the only things are, like, little flies and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and then I have, like, some millipedes, which unfortunately, I don't think the animals eat the millipedes anyways,
Yeah.
but, if anything, the millipedes are a pain because they eat all my driftwood, turn
Yeah.
it into dirt, but, yeah, I don't think any of the native insects will be a problem at all. It's mostly tiny little stuff. I think
Yeah.
any bigger insects can't really get in because it's all sealed up pretty good, so I think it's smaller stuff that came in when I brought the topsoil in.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. That's fair enough. So, as it's an outside enclosure technically, and it's a greenhouse, do the animals benefit from any of the natural like UVBs? Because I noticed recently you've added a few luminized units in certain places.
Yeah, so I, originally, when I researched the whole things, this is one of the mistakes that I made. I, found all these studies and stuff, and I know things on lighting can get very complicated, so I'm not gonna
Yeah.
get all into it. But I found out that polyethylene does it can permit UVB to go through, basically. It's just at like 30% less
Right.
than it would be with natural sun, which is still significantly more than we give them in our cages anyways. So I thought that was going to be okay. But what I overlooked was that the plastic that the greenhouses are made out of have chemical retardants in them to block UV
Right.
specifically so they don't degrade so fast. So it does not. So I bought a solar meter and I checked everything and it was straight zeros. It does not let
Perfect.
UVB in at all. And I'll be making a YouTube video going way in depth on this soon. I'm just currently testing out a product that I'm not supposed to talk about too much yet. So I'm
That's
gonna
fair enough.
wait until that is out and official, and then I'll make the YouTube video talking about it all. But yeah, so what I ended up doing was mounting like the product I just mentioned, and then some luminized units just
Yeah.
all over the greenhouse at like known basking spots. And I still need to add a lot more. So this is like the temporary fix for now to make sure the animals are getting UV. But I got a plan to have like a bunch of luminized units and then a bunch of these other units in there too. So pretty much every possible basking spot in the greenhouse will be getting at least some UVB.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And obviously, with the luminized, you've got the option of having it doing the ramp up and the ramp down. With obviously, you're getting natural light. So are you utilizing the up and down ramping, or is it just they're on or they're off?
Yeah,
Just
I do the ramping, but I have it like falls behind the natural daylight schedule.
right.
Right. So the sun comes up and then an hour or two later the UVB lights start to turn on. So that's actually one of the things why I wanna make, like, strong basking zones in the greenhouse too, because it's hard. The animals in the greenhouse, they don't the UVB light is, like, super dim in there.
Yeah.
When we have them in our house, they're, like, blinding at 100%, you know? But in the
Yeah. Yeah.
greenhouse, you can stare right at the bulb, you can barely even see it. So, like, the animals obviously that want to bask, like the blue day geckos, they like to go up high and bask a lot.
Yeah.
So they'll go to the hottest spot of the greenhouse and just sit there right in the sun. So I have to like watch where they go and then mount lights close to them. But
Okay.
yeah, sorry. Anyways, I do use the ramping. It just kind of falls behind the daylight. I don't know if it does any good or not, but
No, so you
I just
almost
like
need
having
like
them turn on and off slowly.
extra. Yeah, so almost need like extra LEDs just to make that spot really bright to try and encourage the animals to come over.
Yeah.
Because you're battling against the natural sun. As I know we touched on heating as well, but have you got halogens in there as well? Or are you just
No.
use okay, so there's no sort of like hotter basking spot. It is wherever the sun is landing on the day.
Yep, pretty much. But
Okay.
there's so much variation in the temperature of the greenhouse that
Yeah.
animals can easily choose where they want to be. Like if I get on a ladder and go up to the top of the greenhouse, it's insanely hot. It's like 120 degrees sometimes, you know, and then
Wow,
it'll be
okay.
70 degrees down on the floor. So pretty much the animals can just go where they want. And
Yeah,
then
there's
if
a
I have
huge
like a
gradient.
few, because that's one thing I've had people ask is like, well, what if it's rainy for a few days, you know, they don't have any basking, and I'm like, that's what it's like in the wild too.
Yeah.
They don't Animals don't bask every single day comfortably in the wild either, you know? Especially not in the rainforest. They have a lot of bad weather down there and a lot of cloudy situations. So,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, I kinda just let it be natural as far as heating goes, and I think that if anything, it, like, promotes the animals to come out when they would in the wild, so I can, like, know when to expect them, you know? Like, on sunny days, I know I'm gonna see the lizards. If it's cloudy and rainy, I'm probably not gonna see the lizards, probably just frogs, so
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. And I know you said obviously the temperatures where you live fluctuate massively throughout the winter to the summer. Do Does the greenhouse stay at the same temperature all year round, or does it have a natural drop and spike as the seasons go?
So basically the heater's on a thermostat and I just set it to a low temperature. So it's stable all
Right.
year round at that low, which is like 67, 68 degrees, I think, is the lowest the greenhouse
Right.
gets. But eventually I do want to try to replicate systems. Or I mean
Yeah.
seasons, sorry. So I
Yeah.
want to get like a whole controller to where I can set because I'd like the nighttime temperature to actually get lower if
Yeah.
possible. But the problem is if I set that low, then it just stays low during the day if the sun's not out.
Yeah.
Basically, if the sun's not out, the greenhouse is up to whatever the heater's heating it at, you know? That's all it
Yeah.
gets to. But if the sun comes out, it gets really hot in there really fast. Yeah, so eventually I'd like to replicate wet and dry season, which luckily the temperatures don't really change that much. So I think I can use my natural seasons here to help me do that temperature wise. And
Yeah.
then I'll use my like misting and rain system to replicate. So basically in the fall, when things start kind of cooling down and we start getting some bad weather patterns here, I'll start just raining heavy. Like I'll start having like hour
Yeah.
long rainstorms every day and stuff like that, kind of replicate the wet season. And then in the summertime, when it's so hot that my ventilation has to run a lot, that's when my humidity typically drops and it gets hotter in the greenhouse anyways. So I'll replicate that as the dry season. And
Oh,
just
that's
so people know,
perfect.
when I say humidity drops, I mean like to 65, 70%. I
Yeah, it's
mean
still
pretty much
very
below
high.
80. Yeah. Normally it's like 85, 95. It stays like super humid in there.
Yeah, and then you mentioned that you got misting systems as well. So what, as it is at the moment, is it on a set schedule or is it sort of as and when? And what sort of misting system is it? Is it like a homemade one or?
Yeah, so it's a misting system made for greenhouses.
Yeah,
So like obviously I can't use like a Mist King or something in there, would be a nightmare to get it to
yeah, it
work
doesn't have the
and cover
capacity.
everything. Yeah. And then I just have it on a controller. So basically I can set how often it goes off and then for how long it goes off. And then I can have like periods during the nighttime where it doesn't go off for 4 hours or whatever,
Right.
you know? So
Yeah,
that's how I'm running it. And eventually, like I said, I want to upgrade that to like a more complex system. That's one of the things I want to finish hopefully this summer is I'm going to redo my whole misting system and stuff like that. But
yeah,
so I have to constantly adjust, you know. So if I know like if I look at the weather and I can tell it's going to rain for the next week straight, I'll go turn it down quite a bit. So it's not
right,
turning
okay.
on nearly as often. So but like typically right now it's springtime, it's starting to like really warm up here, you know, we're getting a lot of warm days. So I run it for I think it goes off for 40 seconds every 15 minutes.
Okay. So when you're in there doing bits and bobs, are you stepping out? Are you timing it right, or are you just getting soaked for 45 seconds or so?
Yeah, so it's a pretty fine mist, luckily, so you don't get, like, soaked,
Yeah.
and there's one spot right next to the pond that I found where it's over the boardwalk where the misters just don't hit, so, like, I'll run over there and I just, like, hide in that little corner, or I have a valve where I can turn it off. So if I'm, like,
Right.
filming and stuff or if people are visiting, I can just turn it off
Okay.
temporarily. But I
Yeah.
gotta remember to turn it back on.
Yeah.
One day I
And
forgot to turn it on and I was going to lay down, it was, like, midnight, and I was like, "Oh, the misters, I gotta go. I gotta go turn it back on."
oh dear, it's funny what you remember, isn't it? I'm very lucky actually that I didn't lose anything. But last week I think it was, I was doing some maintenance on the enclosures at home, and I was talking to my wife, and then I was going out for a bike ride like straight after. So I was rushing around, and I'd fed the Aki, fed everything else. I was feeding the Gillen on. I was talking to my wife. I put the crickets away, and I went out for my bike ride. My wife was still at home, and I was halfway through. I must have done like 25 miles, and I was like, I didn't close the viv. It just popped into my head. I
Yeah.
was like, I didn't close. So I had like another 25 miles to go, and I didn't have my phone with me, so I couldn't call her. I was like, right, well, I've just got to carry on, and when I get home, hopefully they're there. And luckily, all three of them were just sat basking. I was like, oh my god, and I
Yeah.
definitely won't do it again. But yeah, it's funny what pops into your head.
Yeah.
Um, so back onto the misting system, and obviously wanting to replicate the seasons. Obviously, when it rains in the rainforest, it rains and it's heavy. You don't get that fine mist. So is that something that you want to try and be able to replicate when you like in the future? Is it like a heavier rain as opposed to a mist?
Yep. So I basically my plan is to upgrade and I'm gonna add a so I'm gonna upgrade the whole greenhouse to an RO system. So I'm gonna
Right.
run
Okay.
all the water in there. Other than like the pond and stuff, I'm not gonna use RO water for that. But like as far as misting and water and plants and stuff, I'm gonna start using RO for everything.
Yeah.
And once I do that, I'm going to upgrade to a high pressure misting system. So it'll be like a 2000 PSI misting system that makes extremely, extremely fine mist. They call them foggers technically, you know, because
Yeah.
they make such a fine mist. And that'll run a lot for like short bursts. So it'll probably turn on for like a little 5 second burst, but it'll run super often. So that'll
Yeah.
help humidify the greenhouse and it'll help cool it a lot more. Because one thing is I'd like to bring the like summertime temperatures during the day down a little bit more eventually, so that'll help cool it, and that'll be like my misting system. And then when I get that, I'll switch my current misting system out to a rain system. So I'll
Right.
switch it out to nozzles where it literally is like the little, you know, fire protection things in
Yeah.
buildings.
Yeah.
Like it'll literally just pour out water and it'll have little spinny things that spray the water everywhere.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, eventually I'd like to do that. And what I'll probably do is have that run for like 20 or 30 minutes or maybe even less a lot of the time, like
Yeah.
once in the afternoon, you know? So it'll run during the hottest part of the day, and then it'll also simulate like afternoon thunderstorms, which is a pretty common thing like in the tropics.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, the high pressure misting system will do the humidification and cooling.
That's really cool. There's so much involved in it on a scale of the scale of this size. It's I can't even begin to imagine like trying to replicate the seasons like that, because it's not only the animals that you got to do it for, but it's all the plants as well, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, mostly the
Um,
animals, but yeah, the
yeah,
plants definitely. I think like lots of the little mini orchids and stuff like that, I'll get them to flower a lot better if I replicate the seasons. And
yeah,
one problem, sorry, I'm gonna keep talking. I'm gonna close this window real
yeah.
quick
That's right.
though. This lighting's driving me crazy. But one thing that man, where's that at? I'm lost now. But
The plants.
oh yeah, so one problem I have is that it's so dry here in Utah, and I do have to ventilate the greenhouse, to keep it cool enough. So for me to keep the humidity super high and keep things wet, I almost have to keep them too wet. Because
Right.
like
Okay.
most of these plants, they don't like to be soaked all the time. They like to be moist all the time.
Yeah.
Moist and wet are two very different things. I think that's why people struggle with plants and bibs and stuff when they first get them, because they're either keeping them way too dry or they're soaking it way too much. And especially with the more sensitive plants, like lots of the mini orchids and lots of the epiphytic ferns and stuff like that, they'll melt pretty quickly if they're just too wet all the time.
Yeah.
So keeping things from drying out, right now, I basically am on the side of everything's slightly too wet. Like a lot of my aeroids, you'll notice they have kind of yellowing leaves around the edges. That's from too much moisture. So the plan is to use the high pressure misting system to be able to keep the humidity up. And I'm going to add like a whole new fogging system too. That'll be really cool. So a lot of
Right.
times the greenhouse will be like slightly foggy, which just for
That's
aesthetics
really
will be
cool.
cool too.
Yeah.
But that will also help me be able to add gentle moisture to the plants. So like
Yeah.
the fog basically just is like perfect for epiphytic plants' roots to absorb without me having to water them and soak them,
Yeah.
you
So they
know?
won't be saturated all the time, but they will have that
Yep.
humidity. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so right now it's every 20 minutes, everything gets saturated. And
Right.
I'd rather it be once a day, things get saturated, and then they just stay moist the rest of the day. I
No,
think
that's
that'll
really
help with
cool.
like mosses and stuff a lot too. I think mosses will really take off when I start doing that.
Yeah, definitely. Especially around like I can't wait to see like the mosses around the stream, because the stream is just amazing. I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
They did such a good job
I'm
of that.
I'm
So
excited to start like planting the stream and stuff. I'm gonna get some
yeah,
really cool plants around it and mosses. It's gonna be sweet.
I remember seeing one of your Instagram stories where you were talking about wanting to add like the little pools in the stream, and then seeing it recently, I was like, oh my god, it's just amazing. Like under the like where it runs under the boardwalk, and it's so cool.
Yeah, big shout out to Greg Whitstock on that, by the way. He
Yeah,
definitely, I wasn't even gonna, it was gonna be a couple more months before I started working on that, and he hooked me up with all of that. So much
yeah.
appreciated.
Shout out to him. So obviously, I presume with all the animals you've got, you are hoping they will breed in the future. Have
Yep.
you noticed any breeding behavior from any of them yet?
I have not. So the Terribilis are calling now, but they're still a bit too young to breed. So
Yeah,
I'm like almost 100% sure that they're gonna breed no issue. And then, the blue day geckos, they're a pair that I had at home, so
right.
I'd be surprised if I don't already have eggs in the greenhouse somewhere. I
Yeah,
just I'm not gonna
you won't
one
know
day I'm
until
just
you
gonna
see a
wake up and
baby
have,
gecko.
like, 20 extra geckos, but I'm
Yeah,
not yeah, those little blue geckos, I'm not finding them anytime soon, and they lay their eggs in the warmer spots up high, so they like the framework
yeah,
15 feet up, so unless I get up there and search for it, I'm not finding it. So I'm pretty sure I'd be surprised if they hadn't bred. The Tachydromus are pretty new, and then the emerald tree skinks, I haven't noticed anything from them,
yeah.
but I'm not sure that I would. The tree frogs, I think they're ready to breed. I think they just I'm hoping now that I added the stream that triggers them too.
Yeah,
Because before they probably just didn't have they're not gonna go lay eggs just randomly over top of a plant, they need a pool of water or a stream or something
yeah.
typically, and then but they might not until I replicate a wet season, because I know that's like how
Okay.
most people breed them in captivity is they put tree frogs in a rain chamber and just make it pour water, and then they'll all of a
Yeah.
sudden lay eggs. So I think one of my females might be holding on to eggs 'cause she always looks like she has eggs in her, but she's never actually laid them. So
Oh, that's really exciting. That's really, really cool. Um, right. If I don't ask, I will get shot down by some of the listeners. So I don't really know anything about fish at all. Like I said, I kept them, but it was a tropical tank, and I was like 13 years old. It was fine. But I know you have some very cool fish. So what fish are you keeping in
yeah,
the
so I
greenhouse?
love the fish,
Yeah.
but so it's a 2,000-gallon pond, and I have the star of the show is the black diamond stingray. She's a super white cross black diamond. So she's like an extremely pretty black diamond stingray. She has like perfect huge white spots. She's amazing. And then I have 3 silver arowana, one of which is an albino, and then 6 peacock bass. I have specifically the Fogo peacock bass, which are one of the more sought after ones in the hobby. They're the really pretty ones that get the super, super red face.
Right.
So I have 6 of them, and then a tigrinus catfish, which is like a really cool zebra striped catfish.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
yeah, the arowana,
I've
the
seen some of the
catfish.
videos. The stingray, the ray is just it is like you say, it is amazing, and the contrast between the colors is really cool. But I'm not even going to pretend I know anything, but they are cool to look at.
Yeah, no, the Ray is my favorite. She's cool too. She'll come up and play with your fingers and stuff sometimes, but you got to be careful because arowana will bite the crap out of you. So it's always like a race. You got to hurry and play with the Ray for a second before you get bit.
Yeah. And then you've got the screen around the pond as well. Is that to stop the fish getting out or to stop stuff getting into the pond or both?
Both. It's
Oh,
both. So arowana jump. They're
yeah.
like known as suicide fish. They in the wild they jump out and they'll eat stuff and they'll eat birds, and when they're small they eat insects off tree branches and stuff. So they're really good at jumping and they do jump. So that's to keep them in the pond and keep
Yeah.
them from jumping out and dying, but it's also to keep the majority of the animals from getting in the pond. Because basically, if anything touches the top of the water, it's gone.
Yeah.
Those peacock bass are insanely fast. They're like lightning fast, and they're all super mean. So yeah, if anything gets in there, it's done. There's certain things like the blue day geckos and probably the tachydramus that could make it through the mesh, but I
Yeah.
just don't see them jumping in the water ever. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping that will never be a problem. But yeah, it definitely keeps all the like bigger tree frogs and the terribilis out. So the terribilis would probably just, I don't know, they'd probably sit on the edge and tease the fish and end up getting eaten one day if they could.
Yeah. That's
But
great.
one of them will sit up where the window's at in the pond. I
Yeah.
swear, I've seen it like 4 or 5 times now. He will sit there and watch the fish.
That's
I
mad, isn't
swear.
it?
I'll come
It's
home
just
from
there
work and I'll
winding them
walk in
up.
there and he's just facing the glass, just watching them. And I'm like, you actually you're watching them. Weird.
That's brilliant. And as well as the cool fish, you have got some incredible plants in there as well. So, what are your like plant highlights that you've got going on in the greenhouse?
Oh, it's hard. I'm like all over the place with plants, but I have a lot of cool aeroids, a lot of cool philodendrons and anthuriums and stuff like that that everybody loves. And then I still have a lot of work to do hardscaping before I really get into all like my cool little epiphytes, but I really like epiphytic ferns. Like I have one of my favorite ones right now is Lechinopterus mirabilis. It's a super cool little fern, grows cool fronds, but then the rhizome, like the part that grows onto the tree, looks like a big ball of slime. It's just super, super
Okay.
cool looking. And then I have some bromeliads I really like. Like I have a huge one that's called Veretia Uncle Bob. That's the cultivar, but very fitting. But it's massive. It's probably like this big.
Oh
And
wow.
then I have some other smaller cool ones all over. I have, yeah, I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to
There's a
pick.
lot in there. There's a lot in there.
Yeah.
Um, right. So we've been going for nearly an hour, so I am going to start wrapping it up. I have got a few more questions for you. I'm sure we could sit here and chat for ages, but I've got to limit it because it's late for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what so far has been your favorite part of the greenhouse build from start to finish, or from start to where you are now? What's been your favorite bit so far?
Ah, that's a good question. It's hard to say, but man, that's really difficult. Right now, I'm gonna say the stream, but that's
Yeah,
probably just because it's the most recent thing, and that was probably the biggest difference I've seen in 24 hours, right? My other
yeah,
projects took, like, weeks for me to finally get the payoff from it. But I will see the overall just thing, this is kind of not quite the answer you're looking for, but, like, my favorite thing about the whole greenhouse is just, like, the confidence it's given me and my ability to build stuff and
yeah,
like my ability to test out theories and see that it actually works and stuff. So like every step of the way I build something, then I just sit there and look at it for like an hour or two and I'm like, man, I feel like crying right now. This is beautiful.
yeah.
I can't believe it. I can't believe this worked out.
I'm honestly
Yeah,
not. I'm not surprised at all. I remember seeing one of your Instagram stories in the winter, and there was like snow on the ground, and you open the door, and you literally like go from snow to tropical paradise, and it's
yeah,
just so cool, so
yeah.
so
That's
cool.
that was like one of the ideas behind the whole greenhouse thing was and I get I get depressed in the winter, and I get real
Yeah,
sick of
yeah,
it here. So I'm like just like always itching for summer. So I always dreamed of like having just a little mini tropical jungle I could go into in the wintertime. And now I have it, and it is. It's just as
Yeah.
amazing as I imagined. It's really cool.
That is really, really cool. I'm very, very jealous, but at the same time, I don't like to be jealous, but it is, yeah, it's incredible, and what you're doing is just amazing. I love seeing all the updates. Um, where do you see, or how do you see the greenhouse evolving in the near future and in the distant future? What are your plans that you're allowed to share with us?
So in the near future, I plan on my goal is basically by the end of this year to have it tour worthy and
Okay.
like functionally complete, right? The greenhouse is a thing that's never going to be complete.
Yeah.
But as far as like the equipment, the fogging system, the rain system, all that stuff, like as far as, yeah, basically functionally, I want it completed this year, like
Yeah.
done. And then after that, it'll just be growing and maintaining plants, adding new animals, trimming plants, changing things up. So, and then long term, the goal is to have basically everything's going to be grown in like crazy. I think it's going
Yeah.
to turn into a full-time job, just like maintaining things.
Yeah.
But the long-term plan is I want to file for a nonprofit and do tours and stuff. So I'm
Okay.
currently working on a website and everything. And as soon as I'm making enough money off social media to pay for the insurance, then I'm
Yeah.
going to start letting people come do tours and stuff like that. And I really want to reach out to like some local schools and charter schools and get them to come do little field trips for kids and stuff too.
Yeah. Definitely.
Because I want to do educational work through it. That's the whole thing. I like the greenhouse is amazing, but it's not just like a giant animal cage for me. I really want to do educational work, and then I want to eventually be able to help raise money for people actually doing the conservation work in places like South America. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's the long-term goal with it all is do tours and then use social media and stuff to help raise money. But short
That
term is
sounds.
just to try to finish it because it's
Yeah, yeah.
been quite the project.
It's difficult to finish a project that's never quite finished, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and you mentioned there a few more animals. Are there any animals that you know that you want to add, or is it a sort of you wait and see as and when?
Yeah. So I actually have some animals coming this upcoming Friday. So I'm sure by the time you guys see this podcast, you'll be able to see what they are. But I'm adding the first snakes to the greenhouse. And I
Oh,
know this is like
actually,
a
yeah. So
huge thing.
This will be live in 3 weeks. So people online will have already seen it. So what are you adding? What snakes are you adding?
Yep. Okay. So people are gonna have already seen it. I'll say it, but I've been kind of keeping it hush hush and everything. But I'm adding Spilotes sulphureus, the Amazon puffing snake. So
Oh, that's gonna
I'm
be
getting
so
them from
cool.
Roy Blodgett. They're super cool snakes, and they're big snakes. Like the males get like 10, 11 feet, so they get
Yeah,
massive. But they don't really seem to eat frogs or lizards at all. They're super good feeders because there was a lot of considerations when adding a snake, right? It's really
yeah,
difficult to
yeah,
find a species that won't damage things too much, won't harm my animals, but is also like everybody was suggesting snail eaters and stuff like that
yeah,
and boiga and stuff. But I'm like, that it would be hard for me to take care of them properly in such a
yeah,
big space. So I need a snake that's an aggressive eater, but that doesn't eat my stuff. Like it's
yeah,
aggressive,
yeah,
selective eater. That's a very difficult thing to find. But yeah, so the guy I'm getting them from, Roy Blodgett, he currently keeps them in a massive vivarium with lizards and stuff. Like no
wow,
issues at all. So
yeah,
and they're just a super interesting snake. They're diurnal. They're super active during the day. They're fully arboreal, so they'll be up in the tree and on the branches and stuff. And they raid bird nests and eat little fledgling birds and eggs. So I can make little faux nests all over the greenhouse and kind of
yeah,
feed
yeah.
them naturally and watch that. I think that'll be really cool.
Oh,
But yeah,
that's
so I'm for
gonna
sure adding
be
them.
amazing. That's like a
And then
whole
there's
another level.
yeah, yeah, I'm super excited about that. But and that's been like a controversial thing on my social media too. I told people I'm thinking about adding snakes and people went wild with it. That's why I've been keeping it secret. It's just been kind of fun teasing everybody,
Yeah,
honestly.
yeah,
But
definitely. I will not say a word, don't you worry. But yeah,
yeah,
that's amazing. I can't wait to see that evolve.
but then
Um,
there's some frogs and stuff I'm for sure gonna add too. Like one that is 100% getting added is a Phyllomedusa bicolor, the
yeah,
big, huge, waxy monkeys. I can't. They're like
yeah.
the coolest display tree frog you can possibly get, and their call is so cool. So for sure gonna add some of them before too long too.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. It sounds like there's so much cool stuff coming, and I can't wait to see it. Um, finally, my last sort of question about the greenhouse before we move on to completely wrapping up. If you had to start from scratch, what's one thing you'd do differently?
Um, this is a question I get a lot, and I always have a hard time answering it. I need to think about this more. I should be more prepared, but it's there's like probably a lot of tiny things I would have done differently through projects, you know, but overall
Yeah,
in the big scheme of things, I actually have been like extremely pleased with what I've done. Like I
yeah,
built it the perfect size. When I built the pond, I was worried it was going to be too big or too small. Looking back on it, I'm exactly happy. If I would have went bigger, it'd be too big. If I would have went smaller, it would have been too small. One thing is the heat pump I used to heat the pond.
yeah,
I wish I would have took more time to research HVAC stuff and learn about that because basically when it's heating the pond in the wintertime, it blows out cold air into the greenhouse. And then
right,
when it's
yeah,
cooling the pond in the summertime, it blows hot air into the greenhouse. So I should have done like a mini split or something where the actual heat pump portion of it is outside the greenhouse. Would
yeah,
have been a lot smarter. And I may eventually upgrade to that. That's the only like major thing that I don't like. Everything else, I think with what obviously I'd like to build a bigger, better, cooler one. But like with my resources and everything I have and what's possible for me, I think I am pretty happy with how I did everything so far.
yeah, definitely. To be fair, it sounds like you've absolutely smashed it. Like it talking to you for the last hour, that you've not said anything negative at all. There's not been like a, oh, I wish I did this, or I would love that. When I asked the question, I knew it was going to be a difficult one for you to answer.
Yeah. I will
um,
say UVB, I
hold
guess.
on.
I wish I would have
Yeah,
researched that more and realized that early on so I could have had the UVB all figured out before I put animals in there. Because I
yeah,
had the emerald tree skinks in there for probably, I think, 3 or 4 weeks before I added any UV. So
right.
luckily, that's not too long to deprive them, but it sucked kinda, like, rushing, being like, "Oh, crap, I'm torturing my animals. I need to hurry and
Yeah,
get
yeah.
something figured out," you know? It would've been nice to just plan it ahead of time, but it all worked out anyways, so
Yeah. No, perfect. Well, Zach, I've absolutely loved this, but we have pretty much unfortunately run out of time. So I have a new wrap-up question for the podcast, which is like the final question of the episode. I changed it last episode because I didn't like the new one, the one I was using this year. So you are the second person to answer this question for me. And the question is, if money, space, time, and legality are no issue at all, what
oh,
animal would you like to keep? And I have to you have to do two. So animal as a whole, any animal ever, and then reptile specific as well.
man. Ooh, man, that is so hard. That
Yep.
is crazy. I'm like one of those people that bounces all over stuff, so that is
That's
such
all
a
right. It doesn't
hard
have
question
to
for me to
no one's
answer.
holding you to it. So if you change your mind, it doesn't matter.
Uh, I don't know, honestly, I think, if, like, money and space and stuff wasn't an issue, I would really love to work with, crocodilians and monitors.
Yeah.
But, like, for me to work with them, I would want, like, ridiculous amounts of space. I'd wanna
Yeah.
build greenhouse style setups for them that are, like, 500 feet, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, I would say crocodilians would be super, super cool.
Perfect. Yeah, that is cool. And is there a particular animal that's not reptilian that you would like to keep? Last week we had a beluga whale and a giraffe.
A beluga whale.
Yeah.
Dang, sick. Um, yeah, I don't know, monkeys, I guess. Some sort of monkey would be super cool in, like, a big, huge naturalistic setup.
Yeah, definitely. I like it. I like it. Well, Zach, there we go. That's all we've got time for today. Thank you so much for coming on. Before you go, where can people find you?
So, my handle is a life exotic. So at Instagram, it's a.life.exotic. YouTube, it's just a life exotic. TikTok at a life exotic. And then I also have a Patreon that you guys can check out if you want to see like some behind the scenes content and get some merch. But yeah, the life exotic's the handle. You pretty much search that on any of the platforms and you'll find me.
Perfect. Right. I'll pop the link in the show notes below as well. So if you can't find it, come back to the episode and it'll be there. It's time to say goodbye, but please hang around in the background studio and we'll have a quick catch up once the episode is finished. But thank you very, very much for agreeing to come on today. I've absolutely loved this. So for now, I will say goodbye to you, mate.
Yeah, thanks for having
Nice
me.
one. No worries. Thank you very much. Right. Well, there we go. That I think was my favorite episode of the year so far. Thank you all for tuning in today. I'm sorry this episode wasn't live, but people have got other things to do, and I am busy today whilst you're watching this. But yeah, if you want to keep up to date with what's going on with me or the podcast, go on Instagram or Facebook and just search ReptiChat, and I'm sure it will pop up. As I mentioned at the top of the show, there is a Patreon available. It opens you up to a private Discord where you get early access to extra content, pre-recorded episodes, and a little bit of merch. And it starts at as little as £1 a month. There's even a 7-day free trial. So that's that. I've been your host, Ben McIntyre. This has been a ReptiChat podcast, and I'll see you next Saturday at the same for a Repti vlog.